Today's topic I want to talk about is kind of like a follow-up regarding interviews, right? We had kind of talked about spotting the right candidate. Now I want to kind of talk about what are some of the questions to ask, when you're trying to hire a teacher. And I'm going to share some of the questions I ask, and purposely why, because I just want to give you an idea why I ask these questions. So it's not just telling you the question, but also why I'm asking these questions. So hopefully this will be somewhat beneficial. I'm going to go ahead and begin. One of the first questions I like to ask, and when a candidate begins after first introducing everyone and saying that you will have an opportunity to ask us some questions, but we'll begin with asking you some questions, is to let them take the first few minutes, only a few minutes, to go ahead and talk about themselves. Highlight stuff that's on their resume to anything that's not out of their resume. And there's two reasons why. One, they should be comfortable talking about themselves. So this gives me an idea to understand their communication skills. Because if they're having a hard time kind of even talking about themselves, think about when they have to teach a concept that they may be learning, or it's a new concept they have to teach to someone else. So that's why what I want to learn from them is not just like, okay, the information, but how are they conveying and talking about themselves, who they know the best, right? So that kind of gives you an idea. And when we say 1 to 2, 3 minutes, because then it also gives you an idea, can they talk about themselves in a concise, proper manner in a small time, because you don't want a teacher who is long-winded and never finishes on time, right, with their coursework. So that's some of the reasons why of asking that question and putting a time limit and say, hey, tell us more about yourself, highlight stuff on your resume to anything else that gives us a better understanding of who you are as a teacher, and can you do that in about 1 to 3 minutes max, right? And that kind of gives me a better idea from their speaking skills, their demeanor, and their presentation. So that's one of the reasons I've asked that question. The other thing that I kind of ask is that, is like, what are, people have to describe you in 3 words, how they describe you. And they might ask you, their friends are their students. And I'll say, you know what, give me both. Give me how would students, characterize your friends. And it might be different. It's sometimes good to get it from what friends and family might say to what students might say. It kind of gives you an idea how, we're really strict, or, very open, very humorous. Kind of gives me an idea. And if I wanted to follow up and say, well, yeah, you said these 3, can you give me an example of why they would say that? Because that gives me a better perspective of how they're perceiving what others might perceive of them, and then even giving examples of why that characteristic trait that they are. So I think that's another thing that really I feel is very beneficial. The other thing is that you want to ask them and saying, well, what do you think are some of your strengths, right? So the strengths might be something that they described, or it might be something else, because what it does, it gives me an idea of what are they think their strengths are as an educator, right? And then even if they kind of say something like, well, organization, then I might do a follow-up and say, okay, hey, tell me how, what makes you so unique in your organizational skills, right? And then, that they can kind of plan that out, or my communication, or my writing, whatever it is. So I think what that does is helps us get a better understanding of who they are. Another a question that's really important is to ask, what's one area that you can improve on? Right? I like the word improved and weakness, right? Because sometimes people feel like, oh, it's weakness. Say, what's one area you can improve on? Now, if they can't list anything, it kind of gets me a concern and saying, well, you think like you have no issues at all? Or if they say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, it is something I can improve on. It's my communication, my writing skills, or whatever. And then they could do a follow-up and questions like, well, what are some steps you think you could do to make that better? Is an area that kind of gives them an idea. So I think that helps out too. So regarding that, so keep that specific thing in mind. The other kind of question I think which was very important is that the idea of kind of ranking themselves in specific categories that you think is important, right? So if you had to rank yourself 10 being amazing, 1 being like, really need some help, like, good Lord, struggling. And you give them categories and say, well, how do you think you in connecting with kids? In instruction, how would you grade yourself 1 to 10? If someone says 9 and 10, so well, give me an example of a great lesson that you've taught. Or in dealing with patients, like social emotions, what do you think of controlling your anger? How do you think of working with others? Rank yourself 1 to 10. Dealing with parents, 1 to 10. Working in a team, 1 to 10. How do you rank yourself in your communication skills in writing, in listening, in verbal communication? So these are kind of things, because when you have that, gives them an understanding, get a perspective, and then anything you can follow up and say, give me an example, kind of gives you some area that you're kind of like, well, I want to get a better understanding why you ranked yourself so high, 9, 8, or what you thought for 4 or 5. And And it kind of gives you, because if you give 7 or 8 and they're always giving 10, 10, 10, you're like, well, you don't think there's no room for improvement. So that becomes a concern also. So I think that's some of the things, just to kind of looking at categories that you think is very important for them that they need to have, or areas that you felt like in your school that you need someone, you're hiring this person. So if you're like a principal and you're even trying to get from a teacher, you want to make sure in lower grades that they're enthusiastic, they like to work with others. Those factors play a big component. If not, it could be problematic. So I think it's so kind of ranking yourself into those 1 to 10 is very important. Also kind of telling them, hey, look, if what do you think the goals for, as an educator is, right? Not just the regular, the storyline, to make them lifelong learners, but kind of be like, hey, what's your vision? What's your goal? What do you think you want to achieve by the end of a class if you're teaching 3rd grade or 5th grade? What do you think is important as a teacher to have? Because it kind of gives you a better perspective what they think a teacher is. And I think that those kind of specific things where it's kind of making them not just be quick yes or no, but really making them think kind of gives you a better understanding of who they are, what their things are, what was a lesson that didn't go well and how would you try to make it better. That means that they even reevaluate themselves and try to tweak it. So I think these specific questions are so huge as leaders. And then I think if you have an opportunity where they could go and teach a class, or they could observe some other teachers and saying, hey, what did you see? What was good? What was some area you can improve on? Helps you, especially if you're getting an administrator. It would be great for them to do that. I remember one time I sent one of our potentials to a teacher, and I told the teacher, I want you to do 4 or 5 unique things. And I wanted to see if our potential administrator would tell me if they saw that. Right? Because I want to be like, if they're honest, like, and what I did is I hyped that teacher up. That's one of our best teachers. That's one of our best teachers, this and that. And I wanted to see like if they would tell me, no, I don't think so. And here's the reasons why. And so it was good. One of them didn't say anything. The other one said, I noticed this and that. I know you're teachers, but this is what I saw. And I told her, thank you. That's where I wanted to see that. You were going to tell me, even just because I thought something's well, you didn't see something right, you are going to inform us and going to clarify it. So I think those are for certain things to kind of keep those things in mind. So hopefully there's a lot more you could have, but I thought these were some little small tidbits that you could use as administrator, for, asking questions for a potential teacher there. So you want to make sure, focus again on the cognitive, and there's a lot more you could do, but on the social emotional, the character behavior, and their self-reflection, because that way that when we're giving criticism, they could deal with that. So even the idea stuff like pet peeves, you want to ask that question, like, what is your pet peeve? Because you'll know that when they're working with others, and if organizations win and that other teacher is always messy, that could get annoying. Even the idea when you ask about 1 to 10, how do you deal with stress? What do you do to de-stress, right? If they're like, oh, nothing, or I just kind of think it through, that's a problem, right? If they don't exercise or read or have self-talk or talk to someone, those become problematic individuals too. So keeping these things in mind, and good luck with the hiring process, and hopefully everything goes well. Thank you.
We are honored to say this video is sponsored by Amana Mutual Funds. Amana Mutual Funds favors companies with low price-to-earnings multiples, strong balance sheets, and proven businesses. They follow a value-oriented approach consistent with Islamic finance principles. Start investing in a pure way today with Amana Mutual Funds.